It was a crisp autumn evening in Washington, D.C. when the unexpected happened. The auditorium at Georgetown University was filled with an eclectic crowd: students, professors, journalists, veterans, diplomats, and ordinary citizens. They had come for what was billed as a dialogue on leadership, legacy, and the future of humanity. But no one in that room, or watching the live stream across America, could have predicted what would unfold. At the center of it all stood Morgan Freeman, the voice of gravitas, wisdom, and enduring moral clarity in American culture. At 88, he had long since earned his place as a cultural sage. But tonight, he was not here to talk about film, nor even about race or America. He was here, he said, to talk about courage, the kind that changes nations. He stepped to the podium slowly, taking in the audience with eyes that had seen too much and yet still believed in the possibility of redemption. "We Americans have a strange habit," he began, his voice low and steady. "We like to think we are the moral compass of the world, that we set the standard, that our leaders, polished, eloquent, rich in decorum, are examples of virtue and vision. But tonight I must confess something to you." A hush fell over the auditorium. "It's not one of our own I've come to praise. It's a young man from a land we too often overlook. A country we can't even locate on a map unless there's a crisis, a man named Ibrahim Traoré." There was a ripple of surprise. Most in the room had heard the name. Some knew of Burkina Faso's struggle. A few had followed the headlines. But none were prepared for the depth of what came next. Freeman stepped away from the podium and began to speak like a man telling a sacred story, not reading a speech. Ibrahim Traoré is not just the president of a West African nation. He is the embodiment of what we lost, and what we must find again. He is the whisper of Malcolm, the defiance of Mandela, the fire of Thomas Sankara reborn. But above all, he is what America has long forgotten, a leader who would rather die on his feet than live on his knees. His voice trembled slightly, not with weakness but with conviction. "I read a letter he once wrote to his soldiers," Freeman continued. "We have nothing but our courage and the land beneath our feet. But we will defend that land and our dignity even if it costs us everything." You don't write that kind of letter if you're playing politics. You write that because your people are bleeding and the world has turned away. We, in this country, talk a lot about democracy. But how many of our leaders would sleep in the same boots they marched in? How many would take a bullet for their children's future, not just make speeches about it? The silence in the hall was reverent now. Many lowered their eyes. Some wiped tears. And Freeman's voice pressed on, deeper, more urgent. Traoré came to power not by ambition, but by necessity. His country was fractured. Foreign troops patrolled his soil like landlords. The people had hope in their hearts, but fear in their eyes. So what did he do? He didn't beg the West for permission. He didn't play the puppet. He looked into the soul of his nation and said, "You are free, but only if you fight to stay that way." He cut ties with exploiters. He chased out the shadows of colonial ghosts. He built alliances that served his people, not the pockets of foreign powers. And for this, he was ridiculed, called a dictator, a rebel, a threat. Freeman paused, his hand shaking slightly as he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded paper. This is from a village woman in Burkina Faso. She lost her husband to terrorism, her son to poverty, and nearly gave up her life trying to feed her daughters. But she wrote, "President Traoré gave us back our pride. We are no longer waiting for the world. We are standing for ourselves." The actor's voice broke slightly as he read the last line. "He is our son, but he fights like he is the father of a whole continent." Freeman looked out into the audience again. There were no interruptions, no coughs, no fidgeting, only the stillness of a nation listening not just with ears, but with its conscience. And so I ask you, when was the last time we had a leader who made us weep with pride instead of fear? When was the last time someone reminded us that leadership is not about how you look on television, it's about how you stand when the world turns against you? He turned his eyes to the cameras. To the people watching this across America, I don't care what your politics are. I don't care what party you belong to. What matters is this: There is a man in Burkina Faso who has shown more moral courage in 2 years than many of our leaders have in their entire careers. And if we are too proud to learn from him, then maybe we no longer deserve to lead the world." A long silence followed. Then, slowly, people began to rise, not in applause, but in acknowledgement, as if something sacred had been said, as if truth had come to visit and found a home, if only for a night. In the days that followed, clips of Freeman's speech went viral. Cable news couldn't stop replaying it. Social media lit up with conversations not just about Traoré, but about America's own soul. Young activists printed his quotes. Professors assigned his biography. Churches and community centers held discussions about what real leadership looks like. Even in Congress, the murmurs began. Some dismissed it as just another Hollywood speech. Others knew better. Because once truth lands in the heart, it doesn't leave. And somewhere in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré sat at a wooden table, surrounded by dusty maps and letters from villagers. When he was told about Freeman's words, he simply nodded and said, "I did not ask for praise. But if the truth has been spoken, let it walk freely." And so it did. Across airwaves, classrooms, dinner tables. Morgan Freeman hadn't just praised a leader, he had held up a mirror. And what America saw in that reflection would haunt and inspire it for generations. Because sometimes the most powerful lesson comes not from within, but from the quiet, burning light of a distant star. And what Morgan Freeman said about Ibrahim Traoré, it stayed. It settled into the bones of the nation. Forever. The truth America couldn't unhear, Morgan Freeman's second message about Ibrahim Traoré. It had been 6 months since Morgan Freeman's words had shaken the moral foundations of the American public. The original speech, raw, unpolished, unscripted, had transcended borders, stirring something primal in people who had long forgotten what authentic leadership felt like. But the question lingered. Was that a fleeting moment of clarity, or the start of something deeper? Then came the letter. A handwritten letter, sealed in an old leather envelope, addressed simply to the people of the United States. From a citizen who believes. Morgan Freeman had penned it not as a celebrity, not as an actor, not even as a public intellectual, but as a man who had spent nearly 9 decades observing the rise and fall of human integrity. He had asked for it to be published, not through the mainstream media, but through small community papers, black-owned bookstores, tribal newsletters, and the quiet corners of the internet where truth often hides. Its contents shook those who read it. It was not a call to arms. It was something more devastating. It was a lament and a plea. "My dear fellow Americans," the letter began, written in Freeman's unmistakable cursive script. "Some time ago, I spoke about a young African leader named Ibrahim Traoré. I spoke from my heart, and your response told me I was not alone. But I must confess something now that weighs heavy on my soul. I underestimated how far we have fallen." He went on. "After that speech, I was invited to dinners, summits, think tank discussions. They called me inspiring, thought-provoking, necessary. But then they'd laugh in the hallways. They'd say things like, 'He's romanticizing Africa,' or 'Freeman's gone soft in his old age.' One man, a high-ranking official, said to me, 'That boy Traoré won't last a year. The West always finds a way to clean up these little messiahs.' And that," he wrote, "was when I knew the sickness wasn't in our politics alone. It was in our bones." He described a moment a week after his speech, when a 16-year-old boy from Detroit sent him a message that read, "Mr. Freeman, I watched your speech 5 times. I never heard a black man speak about another black man like that, without jealousy, without caution, just love. It made me want to stand up straighter." Freeman wrote, "That message broke me. Because I realized, we are starving. Not for food, not even for justice, but for dignity. We are starving for the sight of a black man who leads not with fear, not with greed, not with swagger, but with purpose." Then he pivoted. He began to speak, in his letter, of what America still refuses to confront. "Why is it," he asked, "that when a black man in Africa stands tall, we call him dangerous, but when a white man in a suit drops bombs from a drone, we call him presidential? Why is it that our media can spend hours dissecting the fall of African nations, but not 1 minute investigating who held the knife? He didn't ask rhetorically. He named names. He cited multinational companies that had drained Burkina Faso's soil for gold but left its people drinking poisoned water. He listed intelligence operations designed to destabilize any African leader who dared demand sovereignty. He quoted leaked memos from Western embassies that openly referred to Traoré as a disruption to regional influence. And then, in a paragraph that would later be printed on posters in universities, churches, and protest marches around the world, Freeman wrote, "We claim to admire freedom, but we despise the truly free. Traoré is not dangerous because he has guns. He's dangerous because he cannot be bought. And in a world built on chains, economic, psychological, military, a man who walks upright terrifies those still crawling." The letter turned deeply personal after that. Freeman spoke of his ancestors, of great-grandfathers who had been enslaved, of grandmothers who had whispered revolution in kitchen prayers, of the dreams his mother had buried just to raise him in a world that saw her as invisible. "Ibrahim Traoré," he wrote, "is a dream my ancestors did not live to see. But they dreamed of him nonetheless. A man who is not polished, not perfect, not protected, but willing to bleed for his people's right to live unchained. I am not asking you to worship him. I am asking you to watch him, to learn, and to ask yourself why your own leaders, with all their power, seem so small beside him." That letter, distributed in whispers and digital scrolls, took on a life of its own. Black churches across Atlanta read passages from it during Sunday service. Native elders in South Dakota printed copies and handed them to their grandchildren. In Oakland, a mural appeared overnight. Morgan Freeman's face, painted beside Ibrahim Traoré's. Between them, a single sentence: "What the world fears is a man who cannot be owned." Then something extraordinary happened. One cold February morning, thousands gathered outside the Lincoln Memorial. They came with no banners, no speeches, just silence. They stood shoulder to shoulder, black, white, African, immigrant, veteran, student, holding copies of Freeman's letter. And on the marble steps, an empty chair. It bore no label, but everyone knew that chair was symbolic of a kind of leadership America hadn't seen in decades. The kind that could not be found in campaign slogans or corporate boardrooms. The kind embodied by Ibrahim Traoré. In Burkina Faso, word reached the young leader. When asked what he thought of Freeman's second message, he said only, "A man who speaks from his heart is more powerful than 1,000 armies. And if the world is listening, we must not waste this moment." He then did something unusual. He requested that his entire cabinet read the letter, word for word, before their next policy session. He told them, "This is not flattery. This is pressure. Now that they see us, we must become even more worthy of their gaze." Back in America, something had shifted. Students began citing Traoré in debates on ethics. Soldiers returning from foreign deployments asked why they were trained to defend regimes that didn't defend their people. In Congress, a few brave voices began asking if U.S. policy toward Africa had been not misguided, but immoral. And in neighborhoods across the country, those long ignored, murals of Freeman's quote appeared beside portraits of African revolutionaries. If we are too proud to learn from him, then maybe we no longer deserve to lead the world. That letter became a mirror, and it refused to crack. Some tried to bury it, to mock it, to dismiss it as elder idealism. But it was too late. A flame had been lit, and in the hearts of millions, a question burned hotter than ever. If real leadership still exists in the world, why doesn't it exist here? So now, America stands at a crossroads. One direction leads back to comfort, padded lies, and political theater. The other leads into uncertainty, but toward dignity, truth, and perhaps redemption. And if you listen closely, beneath the static of headlines and the noise of cynicism, you can still hear Morgan Freeman's voice echo across the soul of the nation. Somewhere, a young man in Africa is fighting not to be remembered, but to make his people unforgettable. And if that does not humble us, then maybe nothing ever will. What Morgan Freeman said about Ibrahim Traoré. wasn't just a speech. It was a reckoning. And for America, it may yet be the last chance to remember what it truly means to lead.